What's going on, everyone? Welcome to another episode of the Brave and Faithful podcast. Uh, this evening, I have another special guest with you guys. He is um, pretty much has been to the many different branches: Army, Marine Corps. I believe you said Air Force.
Right.
Air Force veteran, totaling 25 years of service. I have none other than Mr. Joe Lewis of Angels of America's Fallen. Joe, how's it going?
It's going well. Thanks for having me on. I appreciate it.
Well, I appreciate you for taking the time, but let's just go. Starting off with your service, total of 25 years and three different branches. Can you, briefly kind of just go over that and how that went about?
Yeah, it wasn't designed to be that way. It started with actually the Army National Guard right out of high school. I turned 18 at Fort Sill, Oklahoma, did field artillery with the Army National Guard and did that through college, and then active duty in the Marine Corps. And for about 11 years in the Marine Corps, I ended up breaking my back and I couldn't keep doing my MOS. So I ended up getting out and I went to the airlines just briefly with American Airlines, and then 9/11 happened. And
Okay.
I found a full-time, I was active with an Air National Guard unit and was doing some counter narcotics, counter narcoterrorism stuff. And with that, worked with law enforcement from Secret Service down to local drug task forces, and with the Coast Guard with some of the counter narcotics stuff. And when I was in the Marine Corps, I did carrier operations with the Navy and then also through flight school. So I ended up having a really cool run in different branches with awesome people from all over the country. And I ended up losing friends in every branch. And that was kind of the motivation and the background behind wanting to start Angels after I retired.
So before we go into Angels of America's Fallen, the nonprofit that you created, um, what was the time frame of serving in all these branches? Was it
From 1986 up on through, and I retired actually in 2011.
okay? What would you say was your favorite branch?
So my dad's a Marine, and I spent more time in the Marine Corps than any other service. So I would say I have a greater attachment to the Marine Corps.
Okay, that's where you were like, hey, what branch were you in? With Marines would be.
If I had to answer one on a click box, I would probably choose that. But I'm retired Air Force officially. They were all great. I mean, we kid back and forth, inter-service kind of stuff, making fun of one
Right.
another. But there's really awesome people and different differences about each branch. So picking a favorite is kind of hard to do, but definitely with my dad's service and then mine longer than any other branch, it just that one kind of resonates with me more.
Most definitely. That's awesome, man. And salute to you, brother, for 25 years in those three different branches. That's amazing. I don't think I've
It was a
ever.
great ride. I mean, I
Yeah.
got more out of it than I put into it, and it's something that don't necessarily notice that until later when you reflect back on it. But
Yeah.
it was all really good stuff.
So after you retired from the Air Force, was it?
Yes.
Okay. And then that was 2011. How was that transition from, being in those Army, Marines, Air Force, and then now being in the civilian world?
So it was really interesting because I took a lot of time. I hadn't spent enough time with my family, so we got in an RV and we just drove around the country for a year, and that made the transition a lot easier because I was getting to go new places and experience different things.
Mhm.
But the weirdest part for sure was the lack of camaraderie. So I was with my family, and it was great being with them and spending the time with them. But but it's not the same thing as being part of a unit and having the different people that you show up and work with, and people from all over the United States that I worked with.
Yeah.
So that part was the weirdest piece, was not having the camaraderie, and that still is. There's a saying that I've heard recently, and I think it really applies. That I don't miss the circus, but I miss the clowns, and so that's kind of the way that I look back on the time.
That's awesome. That's a great analogy right there.
Yeah, it's kind of fitting in it.
Right, right.
But also for the transition, there were things that were awesome about it. The retirement, having some income and having TRICARE so that I had health care, and there's a catastrophic cap. So if everything went really bad, the most I was going to spend out of pocket was $3,000 at the time. And so that allowed me to have the time to go and be off in the RV and not worried so much about how am I doing on income. The military retirement, it's a good supplement to the next thing. It's not enough at, with my retirement, it wasn't enough to be, no kidding, retired.
Mm-hmm.
But I think the flexibility that you get from having that stable income and at a minimum some healthcare coverage really gives the flexibility to do what you want on the next go around instead of maybe just having to take the very next thing. And that was a really powerful benefit.
So you mentioned, so you went driving around the country in an RV with your family for a year. You mentioned earlier, one of the things that you missed most was the camaraderie, and also you said that you lost some friends in all the different branches that you've been in. Um, so what kind of led you to creating Angels, this nonprofit?
Yeah, it was noticing that every time I lost a friend, it was a great guy that had little kids, really little kids. Two of my buddies in the Marine Corps had kids on the way they never even got to see born.
Mm,
And it made me really think about it. What are we doing for the kids? How are they doing? How are they growing up? Because typically the spouse would move off or I would get transferred away or something. And then it's just, how are they doing? And it was that kind of a thought, who's encouraging the kids, who's throwing the ball for them. And so I started doing some research into it to see, well, what's out there for kids of our fallen. And what I found was, you get the initial grief counseling, and then there may be some fun outings, maybe a trip to Disney or a week-long camp. But really, it's their whole childhood with them growing up without one of the biggest mentors, generally the breadwinner of the family, and they're having to, go through these crucial formative years, missing the guidance and mentoring that they would have had, and also not being able to afford, in many cases, the extracurricular activities where they get to go out and do the fun things. And then really a lot of focus was on scholarships for once they become adults. And
right.
that's fantastic. It's a great thing. But my thought was, what happens if they fall off the tracks when they're kids, and now the whole rest of their life is going on a different path. So it was thinking about what are we doing for the kids while they're still kids and what I would want for my sons if I didn't make it. And it was actually at a kids soccer game. Both my kids were in championship games. They were a year apart, so they were on two different teams. But just watching them having fun, they both did really well in their games. Both teams won, and seeing the excitement and seeing the interaction they were having with the coach and the other kids, I was thinking, this is something that's very positive. And this is the kind of stuff I'd want to see them doing if I wasn't here too. So that way they're becoming strong young adults and they're learning how to cope. They're learning how to be a part of the team. They're learning how to deal with disappointment and success. And so the idea came to me that, this is what I want to do. I want to start a nonprofit that makes sure kids can get into sports, music, arts, something with a coach or an instructor that's a positive activity for them to do. So instead of being withdrawn and depressed or running with the wrong crowd and getting into trouble after school, instead they're putting their time into a passion, something healthy that they're pursuing, something they want to do.
So with that being said, I know nowadays there's a lot of, programs and nonprofits tailored for veterans and families. And like you mentioned before, like most of those, if they are for, the spouses or the kids, it's mainly for the kids that are already in their teens, right? Mainly tailored to like you said, scholarships, but not really much for like the little kids. Um, how were you able to get assistance with this, and how did you able to basically start the nonprofit?
It started, well, I didn't have any background to do this, right? So I started reading books about how do you do a nonprofit. The first one I read was Why Nonprofits Fail, because it seemed to me if we were to start doing something and provide a service to kids and then fail, then we'd just put them through another loss, and didn't want to see that happen. So, but I had saved up getting ready for this, and started going to college again, I got a master's in public administration and got graduate certificates in nonprofit management, nonprofit development, and program evaluation. But it was just me starting it. It was filling out the paperwork and paying for the first kids' activities myself. Found that there was a local widow in town that was, her husband was the first chaplain to die in combat since Vietnam. And she had 3 young boys. And we just started paying for their swimming lessons. And talking about little kids, The youngest one was so little that we did mommy and me swim lessons for him. But it was trying to network and get people around me to help out with this and to volunteer. And I asked different guys from different branches of the military that I'd served with to be on the board so that I'd have a panel of folks looking at me and helping out with their input and their ideas and telling me if I was doing something stupid. But it was very grassroots start because I didn't have any connections to companies or people with a lot of money. It was
Right.
just starting it, paying for them myself, and then applying for grants as I was going through classes on how to write grants. So the timing was really good to be getting that education so that I could directly apply it to this. And meeting people. So a lot of who I met was through networking with other nonprofit events. And it's grown slower than I wish it could have. I wish I knew somebody that was the head of a large company that could have been, like a big national backer or something like that. But what it allowed us to do by going a little slower was very much focus on the mission.
Mm-hmm.
And if it's not for real impact, then why even do it, right? So we really worked on making this very easy for the busy single parent to register and to interact with us, because if they can't get to it, then the kids ultimately are the ones that lose out. And if you make it a very difficult administrative process and a lot of paperwork and all this other kind of stuff, difficult to register, then families are just going to lose out. So we focused on the processes, we focused on the internal mechanics of running the organization, and we measured the impact so that we knew, is this really something that the families need? Is it something that's actually good for the kids? What's the real impact of doing this? So we were able to focus on that. And now we've got all that collected and we're in a much better position to handle growth and do it responsibly and make sure that we're growing in a sustainable way, that we're not becoming a machine processing numbers. This is about every kid is an individual kid that deals with their grief differently. And every one of them's going to have a different version of their challenges and their way they deal with loss throughout their whole childhood. It's not like the dust settles and they get a new normal. They revisit the loss. When they get a little bit more mature, a little bit older, it impacts them differently than it did when they were younger. So, like a 3-year-old doesn't understand death at all. And when they get a little bit older, and then it hits them differently. And then a lot of times, like say teenage girls, and thoughts about marriage, and dad's not going to be there to walk them down the aisle, and all these kinds of different things. So that was the idea behind a lot of effort into how we do what we do and make sure that it's long-term impactful. One of the biggest differences for us actually is that when we enroll a child, we're sticking with them all the way through 18 without them having to reapply. So it's not like
Okay.
they apply this year and get some assistance and reapply, because really we looked at that and said, if we just tell them good luck, try again next year, and let's say they started soccer and they couldn't have paid for soccer otherwise, and then all of a sudden we tell them good luck, try again, and they don't get accepted and they lose that outlet. Well, now that's an identity level lost for them because they became a soccer player or they became a ballerina or wrestler or whatever they chose. So it's a big commitment to make. That's not the normal nonprofit model, because
Right.
I'm committing and promising to pay for stuff in the future that I don't have the money for today.
Right.
I can only honor that commitment through the goodness of people's hearts. And then you can have things like 2020 happen, COVID, and the world changes, and it can be a real challenge.
Yeah. So that was going to be my next question. So basically, once they're enrolled in your program, they're there until they're 18. Is that what you're
That's
saying?
right. Yes.
Okay. And then
Yeah.
basically, like every year, it's just trying to find basically the money to provide the services for these kids.
Absolutely, it is. And it's a big commitment to make to them. But again, I think that's the way to go for impact. And that's what we're seeing. The really
Okay.
cool thing about it is, now having done this about 8 years, we've seen some kids come in and get started in something at very entry level and then see them progress and see them make improvements. We had one guy that we supported in competitive soccer, and he ended up with college scholarship and went on to play afterwards. We've seen one of our kids got a gold in the Taekwondo US Open. That kind of thing. That's not the only measure of success. Just being happy and avoiding getting into trouble is really the success.
All right.
But it's really cool too when we see a kid that starts off not knowing how to play piano at all, and then later they're doing full blown concerts, and it's really kind of neat to see that long term piece. Another thing about the way we do it is it's not just paying for the activities. That's the first piece that you think of when you hear about us, but it's the long-term relationship and encouragement and follow-up is really where we spend the majority of our time. So we call and check on them. Let's say the kid's registered and they don't know what they want to do in a lot of cases because they haven't had the means. My mom hasn't even talked to them about doing something because she may still be treading water herself. And so when they have this discussion, then the mom picks where she wants her child to go for whatever activity. So she vets locally what activity provider, what coach or instructor, and then tells us, and then we do the registration. We make the payment directly to the activity provider, get the kids started in the activity, then follow up and see, is it really their fit? Because if it's not, we want them to keep trying until they find it. And then let's say they do something seasonal. Well, we'll call at the end of the season, see how they did, and then say, okay, that's great. Between now and next soccer season, what about music? What about art? What about something? What else are you going to do? Stay engaged, stay out there doing something healthy. So it's a lot more than just paying for the activity.
So, since you started in 2012, starting this by yourself, how many kids do you have currently now that's in the program?
So right now we have about 330 kids that are actively enrolled with that long-term commitment. We've got over 500 kids on the waiting list.
Wow.
And what we do, even for those kids on the waiting list, we try to engage them if we can. So we don't have the dollars for it. The budget is what limits the number of kids we've got. If we had more funding, we'd quickly move more kids off the waiting list. But we have to do that responsibly so that we know we don't fail them in the coming years. But last year we provided activities to over 400 kids in total last year, because as somebody graduates out, then we backfill those spots. So the current number isn't necessarily the full amount that's going to get something done during the year. And then for the kids on the waiting list, we actually had a really sad event that occurred. There was an Air Force Master Sergeant with 6 kids, and he was killed in a parachute training accident, and all 6 kids went on our waiting list. And when we called to say, hey, we can move your 6 kids off the waiting list, normally that's a really positive call. But when we called instead, the mom, Alyssa, said, well, I've only got 5 kids now. My 2-year-old just drowned. And it absolutely crushed us. And I mentioned the first kids we ever supported. Sorry, this is working from home kind of the
No
thing.
worries.
But what happened was, we did mommy and me swim classes for the youngest one. So anytime we had really young kids, we always tried to get them in swimming lessons because it's something they could do. What can they do with that age? Hold on, let me see if I can stop this.
All right.
Yeah. So then when I heard that we had lost Lila and she was on the waiting list and we didn't get to her in time, and maybe it would have made a difference and maybe it wouldn't have, but I felt really bad that we didn't get there. And we try to focus very much on the positives and possibilities with the organization. So I called Alyssa and I said, hey, I don't want to have this happen again. I don't have the budget for it, but I'm going to try to just convince swim centers to give basic life safety lessons to all the kids, even those on our waiting list. And I'd like to name this initiative after Lila. And Alyssa was really moved by that, and she came up with a name. So we launched an initiative called Lessons from Lila. And we've been able now, with some help from the National Swimming Pool Foundation, the Michael Phelps Foundation, USA Swimming Foundation, we've gotten all the kids that we had registered that didn't know how to swim through swimming lessons, and almost all the kids on the waiting list currently have also had access to swimming lessons through this Lessons from Lila program. So
basically they can go to a local rec center or whatever that has a pool, and as long as they're in your program, those services are paid for.
Yes. Yeah. And some of that we pay for, and some of it we've been able to find the swimming centers that'll just donate it. So it's kind of a combination.
That's awesome. And how many, you said 550 on the waiting list right now,
Yes.
and then currently 300 or so?
Yeah. And 330, I think, are fully enrolled right now. And like I said, they're periodically, there are some that are, because when they turn 19 and they graduate out of the program, then we call somebody else up immediately. So we'll process through more than that 330 in a year.
So just trying to delve a little more into this, like after they turn 18, do they, obviously they're not in the program anymore, but do you find that they, try to give back in some way? And and help out with the foundation or the organization?
Yeah, we have seen that, and that's a really powerful thing. And I think over time, as we get more kids that have gone through, it's going to become more and more
Right.
powerful. I mentioned one of the kids that had a soccer scholarship, and he recently came back and was a keynote speaker actually for our biggest fundraising event. It's we call it the Angel Gala, and then he's also shared his story and helped us out. We've It's really neat seeing what the kids come up with on their own. We've actually got one currently. So with COVID happened, and all these kids that were in sports and they couldn't go do their activity, and we're trying to find things to keep them engaged. And one of our kids, she's not Hawaiian, she's in Colorado, but her thing is hula dancing, and she's actually nationally ranked like number 5 in the nation in hula dancing. And she did virtual online hula dance lessons for our other kids. So yeah, it's really neat. We see that the kids, the moms, and it's mostly moms. Got a couple of dads in our program where the mom was the one who passed, right? But the majority are moms that we have with kids, and they're really our best and biggest volunteers. It's really, really amazing, actually.
So you mentioned COVID. Um, with that going on, what's been the most difficult? What's been the most trying time since all this has happened?
Yeah, well, fundraising, because
Okay.
the biggest majority, I guess, of our fundraisers are events, and that's like local businesses that'll put on something for us, or a golf tournament, or um, things like we had Jersey Mike Subs, and all the locations in Colorado Springs donated the whole revenue from one day of sales to us. But that day of sales happened right when COVID was beginning, so the fundraiser didn't happen, and our other kinds of things didn't happen. So flexing to what can we do to continue to raise money during this year, and how can we reduce costs as much as possible and become very efficient. We'd already worked on the efficiency part, and we were pretty much about as tight as we can get the ship running. um, but we've seen some other goodness come through, and that's the thing, is that some people are still doing well in spite of this, and they're donating, and connecting with them without being able to physically meet them and network has been a challenge too. So I guess the biggest things then for us were, one, finding ways to keep the kids engaged so they're not just sitting at home and being scared and withdrawn and depressed, and number two, raising the money to continue this program in general, and doing so without being able to go out there and meet new people physically.
Mhm.
So the digital introductions, the Zoom meetings, and all that kind of stuff, things like this podcast actually are extremely helpful, because it's getting us out there in front of an audience we otherwise wouldn't get in front of, and getting people to know that, hey, you know what? Every time you hear about the loss of one of our guys in the military, and we actually support military and first responders. So when you hear of that and there's kids involved, those kids are going to have a gap really the rest of their life. But while they're kids, they're the least equipped to handle it. So as a nation, we should be thinking of, what are we going to do to support these kids? What are we going to do to make sure they don't turn out with negative effects from this loss during their childhood, which in today's world, I think being a kid is more difficult than it's been in history, probably.
Yeah, most
You know,
definitely.
yeah, a lot of challenges. I mean, teen suicide is a big factor, even
It's on
amongst,
the rise. Like,
yeah, even amongst the best of circumstances.
right.
And these kids, after the traumatic loss of a parent, they are statistically at greater risk of anxiety, depression, substance abuse, dropping out of school, and even suicide.
All right.
So we don't want to lose a single child because their parent made the ultimate sacrifice for our country.
Well, I applaud you guys for what you guys are doing, and for those of you guys just joining in, again, talking to Joe Lewis, the founder of Angels of America's Fallen, nonprofit organization helping the kids of our fallen service members. Um, so, Joe, you mentioned a lot of difficult times you faced during COVID, um, but you also mentioned some of the things that you guys, great things you guys are doing. What would you say, or is there like a most rewarding moment or experience you've had since you've founded this organization?
Hmm. Actually, I think it ties together with that family that I mentioned where Lila, the little girl, drowned, and the mom, Alyssa, was raising 6 kids. So her husband was killed in a very odd parachute training accident after multiple combat deployments.
Mm.
And he was a special operations guy with the Air Force. And then 13 months later, she lost her 2-year-old who drowned at home. And they had the fence, they had the gates, everything had to go wrong for that to happen. And shortly afterwards, one of her brothers was murdered. Another one of her brothers committed suicide, and
Oh
she's
my
dealing with
God.
all this grief as a single parent. And she is amazing. She completed a doctorate in clinical psychology, and now she's a grief expert helping others heal. And she came to our Angel Gala and she spoke, and she was the keynote speaker at our Angel Gala. And when she talked about healing and all the different processes to go through and focus on the positives of what you can do. And then after she spoke, then 4 of her kids that we had been supporting for a few years at that point performed in the activities we've been supporting them. So 2 of them played piano, or guitar, and one of them sang a song that he had written himself. And their youngest son did a jujitsu demonstration. We've been supporting him in that for years. And I think that's probably maybe the most impactful moment, because that was a significant loss and a terrible trauma for this family. And then to see them come through out of this stronger and see them, performing and doing very well, that is probably one of my biggest impact moments. That's not, I don't know if you were specifically relating it to COVID or not, but that's my biggest one. But then also, like I mentioned, the little girl doing the hula dancing, and seeing that, and seeing the connection that's made amongst the kids, because I didn't think about that much when it was time to form the nonprofit. I also didn't think much about how much impact it was going to have on the parent. I was just laser focused on, let's engage the kids in activities. And then I see all these other parts that have developed afterwards. And it's the relationships between the families and the peer support that we have. We actually have what we call our Voices program now. And that's for the moms and kids that want to tell their story to help us help more kids. And whenever I see them do that, I see them tearing the wound back open, to tell their story, but I see them growing. And a statement that I make all the time is there's healing and helping. And I see that with these families when they open themselves up and they tell their story, and I see the benefits. One of the really coolest ones was one of the little girls she's about 10, and we had a group of 3,000 military comptrollers that had picked us as the charity for their annual conference. And the mom and I were going to speak to the crowd at lunch and thank them. And the 10-year-old girl said, I'd like to say something too. And so she came up on the stage with us. And, public speaking is like a fear worse than death for a lot of people. But she got up there and she started talking, and she got really emotional, and she brought it back in, and it was a very sincere thank you. And everybody was standing up and clapping for her. And you could see her standing taller, as she was doing this. So I was watching this confidence in this young lady blooming. And that day was the 3rd year anniversary of her dad's suicide.
Oh, wow.
And she got up there and did that on that day. You can't make up stuff like that. It's just too powerful.
Hey, where can our audience find more information on these stories, and how can they support? I mean, we're gonna mention this at the end, but let's just mention it now. Where can they find more information, and how can they support you guys?
So our website is AOAFallen.org, for Angels of America's Fallen.org. We're on Facebook and Instagram and Twitter, more so on Facebook than the other ones. But our website, AOAFallen.org, it's got more information. It's got some videos of the kids we support. And the way people can help us is share our posts, help us raise awareness that there are kids out there that as a nation, we should be standing by and supporting. And we don't do a good job of that, actually. There's a lot of cracks in the system. But you could use help raising awareness and raising the dollars to pay for the kids' activities, and small monthly donations. Even if somebody could donate $5 a month, which is, don't go to Starbucks once
Right.
in that month, that adds up for us. And if it's a monthly donation, it really helps us project and be able to figure out when can we afford to bring another kid off the waiting list, because we've got some stability, and that's something we're always looking for.
So if you're listening right now, make sure you all check that out, aoafallen.org. Again, that's aoafallen.org. And support these kids, because they're, obviously they're fallen service members, pay the ultimate sacrifice and giving everything. So let's continue to support these kids. Jill, what's one actionable step that you can tell our audience to take right now in pursuit of their second service?
Wow. I think the biggest thing would be looking for what you want to do, like with a cause, or, what you're calling, kind of a thing. It might be that maybe you're really good at something and maybe you don't like that, but that's what everybody's always coming to you to get you to help them do. Well, then, consider that. But if you can do it where there is a cause behind it, that passion is going to be what drives success more than anything else. And I would say, coming through the military, once you're transitioning out, you've got these experiences, you've got a broader worldview, because you got out of your little town or big town, wherever you're from, but you've experienced a whole lot more. And if you can take that experience and combine that with a passion, then you become a really valuable asset for your employer, for yourself if you start your own thing, or for the people that maybe you choose to help, even if that's volunteering on the side and your breadwinning thing. Maybe you can't tie your passion to that, but if you can, it makes a huge difference. So I guess that's it. Look for your passion, look for your strengths, and see if you can align the two into your next career.
So you mentioned volunteering. If there's any other way that they can support your organization, how can they, if they wanted to volunteer, how can they do that?
Yeah. So on our website, we've got you can look for things that says if you want to volunteer or just contact us. What we're looking to do, part of the vision going forward, is to build chapters across the nation, because these kids are all across the country. And a lot of times, the families move a few times trying to find a place that feels like home, because they've got to get out. Let's say they live in base housing. Well, they've got to vacate that. And a lot of them will move back home to where the mom's from, but it doesn't feel right, or there's no military community, there's no understanding. And then they might try their old duty station, but there's been so much turnover, it doesn't feel right. And we support the kids no matter where they go. So if we had more people helping us, raising awareness and raising the funds, even small things, like a pizza night or whatever, just convincing a local restaurant to donate a percentage of their sales for a night or for a month, all those things really add up. And so if somebody wants to volunteer and they want to put together a small fundraiser, that's really powerful for us. But in other words, just connect with us, and then from there we can figure out what's the greatest fit.
That's awesome. I appreciate you guys for that. Joe, what's one thing you want our audience to take away from this episode?
I think the biggest thing is, we've probably, depending on how long you've been in, you probably know somebody, you probably lost somebody, whether that's a combat fatality, a training accident, unfortunately, a lot of suicides. If they've got kids, as a nation, we really should be standing by those kids and making sure that we don't lose them after the sacrifice their parent has made. And I think it's too easy to forget about that. It's hard to think about that. It's very sad, right? Mm-hmm. But we focus on the positives and possibilities. And so if people could take away, there are a lot of kids out there who didn't have a say in how they lost their parent, but we can help them focus on positives and possibilities, and that we could use their help to do so.
Again, Joe, we appreciate you and your organization. So going back to that, I know you started this in 2012 by yourself. How many staff members or how many people have helped you along the way, or that are in the organization?
So we have actually, so now we've grown. The first 4 years, I mean, this is all I do. It's my passion. My wife does it with me. We work from home to keep overhead low. Like, there's no off, and nights and weekends are generally fundraisers or when we're talking to the families. But we've had a lot of people that have come on board to help us with. So we've got board members. I mentioned earlier that I had a bunch of guys from different services. We've grown that out. We also have an advisory board, and that's other people that want to connect with us that can leverage their relationships and their networks and things like that. But we have 3 full-time employees and 2 part-time employees now. And I think I started to say this, but I went 4 years doing this with no salary. But it's all I do, and the military retirement and my savings was good enough to last me for a while. But it is a business. It's a nonprofit business, but there's a workload that comes with that. So yeah. And then we've got a lot of volunteers. Again, I mentioned some of our best ones are our families, but we're always looking for more and people that can come in. It's not to necessarily interact with the kids. The families don't really want strangers coming and going kind of a thing, but helping us raise awareness and helping us raise the resources and helping us then, do the administrative tracking and stuff like that. And we work really hard to keep our administrative costs low, by the way, too. It's about 87 cents out of every dollar that we spend goes to program costs. And then the rest is, some on fundraising costs and some for management. but we try to keep it as much as possible. If somebody's donating $1, that's their dollar they entrusted us with to help these kids. And we take that very, very seriously. That's a big responsibility to be a good steward of the donors' dollars.
So, Joe, one last question before we go into our second segment here. I talked to a lot of nonprofits, but it seems like you guys are doing an awesome job in raising funds and making sure that you guys do your mission in providing services for these kids. What's one tip if there's somebody listening right now who might be thinking of starting a nonprofit or have a nonprofit but can't find the way to raise those funds? What's one advice you'd give them?
Wow, that is the biggest challenge, right? Because the biggest challenge is to get out there without having a big marketing budget and all this other kind of stuff. How do you get in front of people? That is still a challenge. I would say if somebody's thinking about a nonprofit, first look and see if anybody else is doing it, and if they are, try to help them. That's probably one good way, because nonprofit is really quite difficult. It's take all the challenges of running a business, but now throw in the fundraising and a lot of different restrictions on it as well. But if somebody's already got one, wow, I think it comes down to networking and trying to find other people that can leverage their resources and their contacts. The biggest predictor of success that I've seen for us to get, let's say, accepted for a grant or a business to start supporting us is when a person introduces us to them. So I would say focus on that, because the cold calls and the online applications, when you're one of thousands, it's really hard to stand out.
Most definitely.
Yeah.
So guys, if you're out there, whether if you're starting a nonprofit or not, I think the key thing from what Joe was saying is just network, get in front of the people that you want to connect with and you want to be with, and just take it from there.
Absolutely.
All right, Joe. So this is the second segment of our podcast here. This is where I ask the same 5 questions that I ask my guests. So first question is, what's one hobby you enjoy?
So it's my most current thing is going out looking for crystals and minerals. I live in Colorado, and there's a lot of good stuff that you can go out in the mountains and get away from the crowds and get out there in the sunshine and just dig and hopefully find something that nobody else has ever found. So that's
Have you found anything yet?
Yeah. Actually, I found some topaz, some amazonite, smoky quartz crystals, and it's, even if I don't find something, it's still exercise outdoors.
Right.
A lot of times by a creek or a river, so it's kind of relaxing.
That's awesome.
I'd rather find something when I go. Yeah.
Yeah. All right. So next question: if you had to choose one person, dead or living, to hang out with for one day, who would it be and why?
That's a great question. And I think I filled this out previously, thinking about this, and now I can't think of who I was thinking I would want to talk to.
You put down Jesus.
Yeah. That's the most obvious one for me, because I'm a Christian, and I believe there's so much positive that comes from that, and to focus on the good. And if I could speak with him and see how he dealt with the challenges of being persecuted, but knowing that was his role, knowing that was his cross to bear kind of thing, was to do that, and that he made the ultimate sacrifice for all of us.
Mm-hmm.
Whether we accept that or not, he made that sacrifice for us. And I see some similarities. We've got military members and first responders that are making the ultimate sacrifice for our country and our communities. And some of them, so it's not like they're persecuted necessarily for it, but I don't know that we do a good job of taking care of them and taking care of those who are left behind. So, yeah.
Next question: recommend a book for our audience to read.
Yeah, I've got a good one. So retired Army warrant officer Jason Krause wrote a book called Opportunity Truths. And what he basically did was, like, if you had the time and you could spend your time reading all these different bestsellers from everybody that's got a self-help book out there, and you could synthesize all of that information, that would be a really powerful thing. But I don't know people that have that much free time. And what Jason did was he made that his mission. He has been reading and reading and reading all these different things. You know, somebody will come up and say, you know, the top 5 ways or top 5 things you can do, or the top 1 thing you should do is this. Well, he looked at all those different ones, and then he looked at, well, what's some commonalities? And then, you know, what things work better together with other ones. So he's taken the main points of all these different books and he's looked at them holistically, you know, for the whole picture. And then he's written his book about it and saying, like, you know, if you basically look at different opportunities that are provided to you or opportunities you can create, and you can use all these truthful, proven strategies, then you can achieve so much more success in your life. He does a good job. Basically, he's taken all these different points, he's put them into one book. He's highlighted different steps from each chapter. I'd highly recommend that one, especially people transitioning from the military, because you're going to go out and you're going to need to sell yourself. You're going to need to do some self-improvement. You're going to need to grow, and you're going to need to do some different things. And this book, I think, is a great launching point for that, because if you take the effort to read and know yourself and know the opportunities and have a deliberate plan to maximize those opportunities, then you're much more likely to be met with success.
And again, that's Opportunity Truth by
Yes.
Jason
And it's on
Krause.
Amazon. You can get it, I think you can get it soft cover, and you can definitely get the digital version. That's what I did. I got the Kindle version.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right, Joe. Next question. What's your favorite quote and why?
So Frederick Douglass, he because it relates to the nonprofit, and he said basically that it's easier to raise strong kids than to fix broken men, basically. And I think we absolutely see that in our society. You know, if our society is making it difficult for kids, and we're having teen suicides, and we've got kids growing up with problems, if we can help them grow up strong and they become strong, healthy adults, then you know, it's an ounce of prevention is worth a pound of cure kind of a thing. So yeah, that one I think is really powerful. Is that it's easier to raise healthy kids than it is to fix broken men.
Yeah, we need some powerful and actual leaders and role models out there as well
Yes.
for these kids, because not too many of them out there right now.
Yeah. Yeah.
So Joe, last question here. Where do you see yourself in a year, 5 years, or even 10 years from now?
I still see myself doing something with angels. You know, this, like I mentioned before, this is a passion for me. This is something I feel very strongly about, and it's very personal, because when I lost friends and I knew they were going to be great dads, you know, I see that hole that's left when they're not here with us anymore. So even if I'm not right, if I'm not the right guy to continue to be the CEO in the future, I still see myself doing something associated with this and supporting the mission.
It's awesome, man. Joe, this has been a great episode. Love what you're doing with the Angels of America's Fallen. You know, for those of you guys that are just listening, again, where can they stay in touch with you, and where can they support the Angels?
So our website, aoafallen.org, on Facebook, Instagram, or Twitter, particularly, you know, reading and sharing our posts. Small monthly donors, volunteer in any capacity you might have, make introductions. That I mentioned, that's the biggest predictor of success. If you know a company that's looking for a good cause to support, we're willing to answer any questions at all that anybody's got about us, period. How we do anything. Everything is full access. Our IRS tax filing, our full audit, those are both on our website publicly. And if you want to make an introduction and recommend us to somebody as a cause they might want to get behind and support, that's very powerful.
Again, guys, that website is aoafallen.org, Angels of America's Fallen. Make sure you guys support this great organization helping out the kids of the fallen service members. Joe, this has been a pleasure. It's great to have finally spoken to you, and hopefully we can stay in touch.
Sounds good. And thank you for this opportunity. And also thank you for what you're doing with Fortis et Fidelis, because I know that, you know, the challenge coins, and you contacted me initially to say, hey, if we've got families of our fallen that would like to have one of these challenge coins, to put them in touch with you. And I hope you know, wish you much success with your apparel brand, and that continues to forward going through. And making impacts for people that have made the ultimate sacrifice, because it's not just the service member, they make the ultimate sacrifice and they're no longer here, but their family sacrifice continues, and it's not going to stop for them. Yeah. So thank you.
Well, I appreciate it, Joe. And again, best of luck.
Thank you.
All right.